The moment you accept a narcissist's final decision without begging, arguing, or chasing, something inside them short circuits because narcissists don't expect peace. They expect drama, pleading, and emotional chaos. And when you calmly let them walk away and simply move forward, they often cannot believe it. Today, we're going to explore why accepting their decision is one of the most powerful things you can ever do. One of the most powerful dynamics that unfolds when dealing with a narcissist is what happens when they make a dramatic decision to leave or end the relationship and expect you to chase them. In many narcissistic relationships, the moment they declare a breakup or deliver an ultimatum is not actually about closure or resolution. Instead, it is a calculated move that relies on a predictable emotional reaction from you. Narcissists often expect pleading, persuasion, emotional appeals, and desperate attempts to change their mind. In their internal script, your reaction is supposed to confirm their importance, their power, and their control over the emotional landscape of the relationship. For many narcissists, the act of making a final decision is less about ending things and more about creating a dramatic moment where they become the center of attention. They imagine the scene unfolding in a specific way. They anticipate you asking questions, demanding explanations, expressing heartbreak, and perhaps even trying to negotiate your way back into the relationship. These reactions are not just emotionally satisfying to them, they serve as validation. When you chase them, you reinforce their belief that they are indispensable and that your world revolves around their presence. This expectation often stems from patterns that developed earlier in the relationship. In many narcissistic dynamics, there are cycles of conflict followed by reconciliation. The narcissist may threaten to leave, withdraw emotionally, or create distance, only to return once they have received enough attention and emotional energy from you. Each cycle reinforces their belief that they hold the power to disrupt the relationship and that you will always work to restore it. Over time, they come to assume that any declaration of a final decision will trigger the same familiar response. What makes this moment so revealing is the narcissist's confidence in that expectation. When they announce that they are leaving or that the relationship is over, they often do so with an underlying assumption that you will react intensely. They may even delay their departure slightly, watching your face, waiting for you to say something that signals desperation or attachment. This pause is not accidental. It is the moment where they anticipate confirmation of their importance. But when that reaction does not come, the psychological impact can be profound. When you refuse to chase their decision, when you accept it calmly and allow them to walk away, the script they relied on suddenly collapses. The emotional response they were expecting, one that would reinforce their sense of control, never materializes. Instead of feeling powerful, they are faced with something unfamiliar: silence, composure, and acceptance. For a narcissist, this is deeply unsettling. Their entire expectation was built around the idea that you would fight to keep them. They assumed that their presence in your life was so significant that you would not be able to simply let them go. When you prove otherwise, it disrupts the narrative they have constructed about their role in the relationship. Suddenly, questions begin to emerge in their mind. Why didn't you chase them? Why didn't you argue? Why didn't you try harder to change their mind? These questions are not necessarily expressions of genuine introspection or regret. More often, they reflect confusion about why their usual methods of control did not work this time. Narcissists depend heavily on predictable emotional responses from others, and when those responses disappear, it forces them into a psychological space where they must confront uncertainty. Another layer of this dynamic is the narcissist's dependence on attention as a form of emotional fuel. When they make a dramatic decision and you respond with emotional intensity, that attention feeds their ego. It confirms that they still hold a central place in your life. But when you accept their decision without drama, you remove that source of validation. Instead of feeling admired or pursued, they are faced with the possibility that their departure did not have the impact they expected. This realization can be deeply destabilizing for someone whose self-esteem relies on external reactions. Your acceptance does not just allow them to leave, it forces them to live with the consequences of their own words. They can no longer use the breakup as a tool to provoke attention or manipulate the dynamic. Instead, they are left with the reality of the decision they made, without the emotional reinforcement they were counting on. For someone who has been caught in narcissistic patterns for a long time, this shift can be incredibly empowering. Refusing to chase their decision does not mean you are indifferent or unaffected. It means you recognize that your dignity and emotional stability are more important than participating in a cycle of manipulation. By stepping out of that cycle, you change the entire dynamic. The narcissist expected pursuit. Instead, they encountered acceptance. And in that moment, the power they believed they held begins to fade, replaced by the quiet realization that your life and your peace do not depend on convincing them to stay. One of the most unexpected moments for a narcissist occurs when the person they believed they controlled suddenly stops participating in the emotional script. Narcissistic relationships often operate on an invisible structure of power where the narcissist assumes the role of decision maker, emotional center, and authority within the dynamic. This structure only works when the other person continues reacting in predictable ways, seeking approval, defending themselves, chasing reassurance, or trying to fix the relationship after conflict. But when you calmly accept their final decision instead of fighting it, the entire structure of control begins to crack. For a narcissist, control is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it appears as subtle emotional pressure, manipulation through guilt, or cycles of affection followed by withdrawal. Over time, these patterns train the other person in the relationship to respond in ways that keep the narcissist in a position of power. When the narcissist pulls away, the expectation is that you will move toward them. When they criticize, the expectation is that you will defend yourself or try harder to please them. When they threaten to leave, the expectation is that you will beg them to stay. This cycle creates a psychological script that both people unconsciously follow. The narcissist expects to control the direction of the relationship, while the other person feels responsible for keeping the connection intact. As long as this script continues, the narcissist experiences a steady reinforcement of their authority. They feel important, influential, and emotionally central. But the moment you calmly accept their final decision, that script stops working. Instead of chasing them, you step back. Instead of pleading, you allow the silence to exist. Instead of negotiating, you acknowledge their choice and move forward. This response may seem simple on the surface, but psychologically it disrupts the entire framework that gave the narcissist their sense of control, because control depends on reaction. When a narcissist pushes a button and receives a predictable response, they feel powerful. But when the button no longer works, they are suddenly confronted with uncertainty. They expected emotional chaos and intensity, yet they are met with composure and acceptance. This creates a moment of psychological disorientation. For someone who has relied on controlling the emotional environment of a relationship, your calm reaction becomes difficult to interpret. The narcissist may initially assume that your lack of reaction means you do not care, but as time passes and they realize you truly accepted the situation and are not returning to the familiar cycle, the meaning of your response begins to change in their mind. They begin to see that their influence over you is not as strong as they believed. This realization can be deeply unsettling because narcissistic identity often depends on external validation. The narcissist needs to feel significant in the emotional lives of others. When their decisions no longer provoke strong reactions, that sense of significance weakens. In many cases, the narcissist may attempt to regain control through subtle strategies. They might test the waters with small messages, indirect contact, or casual conversations designed to see whether you will return to the previous dynamic. Sometimes they may try to provoke a reaction through criticism or reminders of past conflicts. These attempts are not always conscious acts of manipulation, but they often serve the same purpose: to restore the emotional responses that once reinforced their control. However, when you remain consistent in your acceptance and do not return to the old pattern, something important begins to happen. The narcissist is forced to face a reality that they rarely encounter in relationships, a boundary they cannot move. Boundaries are powerful not because they are loud or confrontational, but because they are steady. When you accept someone's decision and allow them to live with it, you are communicating something profound. You are saying that your peace, dignity, and emotional well-being are not dependent on convincing them to stay. This shifts the power dynamic completely. Instead of the narcissist controlling the emotional direction of the relationship, the responsibility for their decision rests entirely with them. They cannot rely on your reaction to soften the consequences or reopen the cycle of conflict and reconciliation. For many narcissists, this is one of the most uncomfortable positions they can experience. Without the familiar emotional responses from you, they must confront their own choices without the usual reinforcement of control, and that is why acceptance can be so powerful. When you refuse to engage in the drama and simply allow the narcissist to live with their final decision, you take back something that may have slowly slipped away during the relationship: your autonomy. You reclaim the ability to choose how you respond, rather than reacting to the emotional pressures created by someone else. In that moment, the balance of power quietly shifts. The narcissist expected to remain the central force in the story, controlling the emotional reactions around them. But by accepting their decision and moving forward, you step out of that story entirely, and without your participation, the script they relied on can no longer continue. One of the most disorienting experiences for a narcissist occurs when the person they expected to remain emotionally attached suddenly becomes calm, composed, and emotionally detached. In narcissistic dynamics, emotional reactions are a form of currency. Anger, sadness, pleading, or desperation all signal to. When a narcissist realizes that their decision did not produce the reaction they expected, another psychological process often begins quietly in the background. They start rewriting the story. For many narcissists, maintaining a sense of superiority and protecting their ego is essential. Their identity depends heavily on seeing themselves as the person who was right, justified, and ultimately in control of the situation. When reality does not support that image, especially when you calmly accept their decision and move forward, they must find another way to protect their self-perception. This is where narrative rewriting begins. Narrative rewriting is the process of reshaping the past in a way that makes the narcissist appear stronger, smarter, or more justified than they may have actually been. Instead of acknowledging that their decision ended a relationship with someone who accepted it with dignity, they create a different version of events in their mind. In this new version, they were the one who saw the truth first. They were the one who recognized problems that you could not see. They were the one who chose to walk away from something that supposedly was not good enough for them. This reinterpretation is not always a deliberate lie. In many cases, it is a psychological defense mechanism. Narcissists struggle deeply with feelings of shame and vulnerability, even if those feelings are hidden behind confidence or arrogance. When something challenges their belief in their own importance, their mind quickly moves to repair that damage by adjusting the narrative. The goal is simple: preserve the image of superiority. For example, if you accepted their decision calmly and did not chase them, the narcissist may reinterpret that behavior as indifference. They might convince themselves that you never cared as much as they did, or that your lack of reaction proves they made the right choice. This explanation protects their ego because it prevents them from confronting the more uncomfortable possibility that you were strong enough to let them go. Another common narrative shift involves exaggerating the flaws of the relationship or the other person. After the separation, the narcissist may begin focusing heavily on small conflicts or imperfections that once existed. These moments are magnified in their memory and presented as proof that the relationship was doomed from the beginning. By emphasizing these negative details, they reinforce their belief that leaving was not only justified but necessary. This process can also extend beyond their private thoughts. Narcissists often share their rewritten version of events with friends, family members, or new partners. In these conversations, the story may evolve even further. They may portray themselves as someone who tried everything to make the relationship work, only to be disappointed by someone who failed to meet their standards. The calm acceptance you showed may disappear entirely from the story, replaced by explanations that make the narcissist appear wise, patient, or even victimized. The reason this narrative rewriting is so important to them is because narcissists rely heavily on external validation. Their sense of identity is often shaped by how others perceive them. If people around them believe the version of events that paints them as the strong or justified party, it reinforces the internal narrative they have created to protect their ego. However, there is an important truth beneath all of this rewriting. The need to change the story often reveals that the original outcome did not align with their expectations. If they truly felt secure and confident in their decision, there would be little need to reinterpret the past so aggressively. The intensity with which they reshape the narrative can sometimes indicate the level of discomfort they feel about the reality of what happened. Your acceptance plays a critical role in this dynamic. When you do not argue, chase, or attempt to correct their version of events, you remove the opportunity for further conflict. This silence may frustrate them at times because it denies them another stage on which to perform their narrative. Instead of engaging in endless debates about who was right or wrong, you simply step away from the story altogether, and that absence can be powerful. Without your participation, the narcissist is left to maintain their narrative without opposition. While this may seem like it allows them to control the story, it also removes the emotional energy that once fueled the dynamic between you. Over time, the importance of the narrative may fade because there is no longer an active relationship keeping the story alive. The deeper significance of this moment lies in what it represents for you. By refusing to engage in the rewriting of history, you protect your own understanding of what happened. You do not need to prove anything to the narcissist or to the people who may hear their version of the story. Your peace does not depend on controlling how they interpret the past. Instead, you move forward with clarity. And in doing so, you allow the narcissist to hold whatever narrative they need to maintain their ego, while you hold on to the truth that acceptance, dignity, and emotional independence are far more powerful than winning an argument about the past. One of the most surprising phases in the aftermath of a narcissistic relationship often occurs much later, when the narcissist attempts to return after believing the situation was already settled. When you accept their final decision and genuinely move forward with your life, the narcissist may initially assume that the story is over and that they have maintained control of the outcome. But as time passes and they notice something unexpected, your continued absence, your silence, and your independence, a new curiosity begins to grow inside them. This curiosity is not always about love or regret. More often, it is about relevance. For many narcissists, relationships function as a source of validation and emotional supply. The attention, admiration, and emotional reactions they receive from others reinforce their sense of importance. When that supply disappears completely, they eventually begin to notice the absence. At first, they may distract themselves with new relationships, new sources of attention, or other external distractions that temporarily restore their sense of significance. But those replacements do not always provide the same psychological satisfaction. Eventually, a quiet question begins to emerge in their mind. What happened to the person who used to care so much? When you accept a narcissist's decision and move on without chasing them, you disrupt the familiar cycle they relied on. In many narcissistic relationships, separation is rarely permanent. There are often patterns of breaking up, reconnecting, apologizing, and repeating the cycle. Each return reinforces the narcissist's belief that they can leave whenever they want and still regain access to the relationship later. But when you break that cycle by truly moving forward, something different happens. The narcissist begins to realize that their influence over you may have ended. This realization does not always occur immediately. In fact, it often takes time for the narcissist to notice the shift. They may expect you to eventually reach out, send a message, or attempt to reconnect. When that contact never arrives, the silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. At this stage, some narcissists begin testing the waters to see whether they still matter to you. The return may not be dramatic or emotional. Instead, it often appears subtle and casual. They might send a simple message asking how you are doing, react to something you posted online, or reach out with a seemingly harmless question. On the surface, the contact may appear innocent, but beneath it lies a deeper motivation. They are testing whether the emotional door is still open. In their mind, the relationship may not be about rebuilding connection, but about confirming that they still have the ability to re-enter your life if they choose. Your response to this moment becomes incredibly important because it reveals whether the old dynamic still exists. If you immediately respond with enthusiasm, emotional vulnerability, or renewed attachment, the narcissist may interpret this as proof that their influence over you never truly ended. This can restart the familiar cycle of attention, control, and emotional push and pull. However, when you maintain the same calm acceptance and boundaries that allowed you to move forward in the first place, the test produces a different result. Instead of regaining the emotional reaction they expected, the narcissist encounters the same quiet independence that disrupted their expectations earlier. This can create a powerful realization. The person who once revolved around them has genuinely moved on. For someone whose identity relies on external validation, this realization can be deeply unsettling. It challenges the belief that they will always remain important in the emotional lives of those they once controlled. In some cases, the narcissist may attempt additional tests. They might increase their efforts to reconnect, bringing up memories from the past, offering apologies, or presenting themselves in a more sympathetic light. These gestures can appear sincere on the surface, but they often serve a deeper purpose, restoring access to the emotional space they once occupied in your life. But when you remain consistent in your growth and maintain the boundaries that allowed you to move forward, something remarkable happens. The dynamic loses its power. The narcissist can no longer rely on predictable emotional responses to reestablish their role in your life. Instead of stepping back into the old cycle, you continue moving forward with the peace and clarity you built after the relationship ended. And that is the moment when the narcissist truly begins to understand something they never expected. Your acceptance was not temporary. Your silence was not a strategy. Your independence was real. By letting them live with their final decision and refusing to reopen the emotional door, you show that your life is no longer organized around their presence. The control they once believed they had disappears, replaced by a new reality where your peace, your direction, and your happiness exist completely outside their influence. And in that moment, the narcissist is left with something they rarely encounter, someone who no longer needs them to feel whole.